Hello and welcome to the Indian Express Explained Live. It's a series of online conversations with domain experts and authorities on specific subjects. This session is being brought to you in association with Yojana IAS, our associate partner. And I'm Rakesh Sinha. I work for the Indian Express. With me today are Dean Starkman, senior editor of the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and he's joining us from Budapest. There's David Pegg, the investigative correspondent of The Guardian in London, and Ritu Sarin, executive editor at the Indian Express, in charge of its investigations. So the topic of the discussion today is the Uber files, and the three persons here will take you behind the scenes on the subject. It's a global investigation into a very large tranche of data. We are talking of some 182 gigabytes that were put out by a whistleblower. These number around 124,000 records from the Uber company and are mainly internal emails, memos, presentations, and messages dating to the period 2013 to 2017. The data reveals how a cab hailing service bypassed laws and regulations, disregarded safety, and lobbied aggressively to duck scrutiny in many parts of the world. Now, before I turn to David on how the Guardian obtained the data, let me start by asking Dean to explain the importance of the Uber files and the big revelations it makes.
I'm happy to, and thanks for having me on. And it's really an honor to join you and to be with Ritu, who a longstanding partner of ICIJ, has been with us for a long time and really has broken some amazing stories. So, look, the Uber files was one of our most impactful investigations. It essentially as David's going to explain where the data came from, but what's in the data is essentially, it shows how Uber, through this kind of assembled this lobbying juggernaut, was able to gain access to some of those powerful democratically elected people on the face of the earth in its quest for global market share. And what I think the main takeaway for me was, but it showed how easy it was for Uber to gain audiences with who's who of global leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu and Emmanuel Macron and the Prime Minister of Italy and in Ireland and Joe Biden. And once you're in the door, you're halfway home. And it was able to influence policy and shape policy globally. And it was doing it, second big point, revelation, while it was essentially flouting local transportation and labor laws, ignoring them or violating them by just setting up shop and running their business without a license, without permits, without any kind of acknowledgement of the rule of law in a sense. So on the one hand, they're being winding and dining the leaders of these Western democracies. On the other hand, they're essentially running an operation that was essentially rogue in most of these markets, and that I think that sort of, just to me, it illustrated that there was something off in the way the democratic process is working. The advantage that capital and money and influence and connections have in liberal democracies, and that's clearly a problem. Another major revelation was, while all this was going on, we find that they were actually using stealth technology and other tactics to evade legitimate law enforcement inquiries. Specifically, we uncovered, or we weren't, I don't think we were the first to discover it, but we showed was far more widely used than anyone ever suspected. This protocol called the kill switch, which was essentially when law enforcement came knocking, and they often did, with subpoenas, with a dozen or so regulators or law enforcement officers. Uber had a protocol essentially basically to shut down the access of the local office to the main services and thwart law enforcement, and essentially was legitimate efforts to enforce the subpoena. And again, all of this was very notable because there was essentially no consequence for these actions. And we discovered they did it in Paris, in the Amsterdam office. They did it in India as well, and it was essentially, there was a playbook for basically thwarting, evading a legitimate law enforcement investigation. And finally, not finally, but also the project showed the intimate degree, the lengths that Uber went. It was an unsuccessful effort, but they did their darndest to gain access to the very corrupt Russian market, and they did it by making very intricate financial deals with Russian billionaires, oligarchs, with the explicit intent of influencing the political system. All this is discussed in Uber text messages, and David is going to talk about the documents. But if you haven't read the series, I got to say, I know we wrote it. we all had a hand in publishing it, but it was it's really interesting to read. From my point of view, the texts are just so intimate and so chatty and so they're so revealing about the attitudes of Uber executives, of Western leaders, that are really, I think, open a lot of people's eyes to the way, not just the way Uber operates, but frankly, the way Western democracies operate.
Right. David, the big question: how did the Guardian obtain the data, and who did it obtain from?
To start with, thank you very much for inviting me, and pleasure to be here too, and to be here with Dean and Ritu and yourself, Rakesh. To start, the data was provided to the Guardian by a whistleblower, by a source, a gentleman named Mark McGann, and the reason that he did that is for many of the issues that Dean was just describing. His own personal sense that this was these elements that we feel were important in our reporting. He agreed with that. He agreed that these were things that needed to be brought to public attention. And so he approached via an intermediary. I think he got in contact with the Guardian back in March, perhaps a bit earlier, if I recall correctly. And there was several conversations between Mark and Paul Lewis, who was the investigations editor of the Guardian, and the reporters on this story, Harry Davies, Felicity Lawrence, and Simon Goodley, chief among them. There was sort of an extended discussion about what exactly he had to share and what his own personal experiences were. So Mark is a really very interesting character. I mean, he was effectively the head of Uber's lobbying operation in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa for about 2 years, 2014 to 2016. This was, I mean, we think now of Uber as a very, very large company, multi-billion-dollar kind of huge tech giant. But it's important to remember that at the time, it was, although it had a lot of money invested in it, it didn't have anywhere near the same kind of scale and reach that it does today. And it was very much the tactics that Dean was just describing that led it to become such a successful company, particularly in those early days. Mark was there at the coalface for a great deal of that. He was charged with contacting politicians, ministers, very senior figures in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And essentially, where Uber wanted to roll out its operations, his job was to liaise with, as Dean says, it often wasn't legal because local taxi regulations didn't imagine that something like Uber could or would exist, and so there was no legal provision for a company like that to exist. And so Mark's responsibility was to liaise with politicians and lobby them for the regulation to be changed, to be updated, so that Uber's operations would be legal. So he did this for around 2 years. He left the company 2016, 2017, and it was earlier this year that he contacted us and said that he wanted to make available some of the files that he had based on his time at the company.
All right. Which brings me to the next question, why did the Guardian share the data with ICIJ?
So we've been fortunate enough to take part in several of these ICIJ projects, going back to, I think the first one the Guardian worked on was 2013. So we've been doing this for almost 10 years with the ICIJ. They've been a fantastic organization to work with. We've got people there that we trust implicitly. That's very important. I think when we obtained the data and began looking through it, we began to realize very quickly that it was very international in its scope. We are an English news organization. We report globally, but we're primarily writing for a British audience. There were a great many stories in here that were highly relevant to countries like this. I mean, they had been lobbying everywhere, from Estonia, Finland, and there are stories in there that might not be particularly important to a British readership, but would be tremendously important to a Finnish or an Estonian readership. And so as we were assessing this data, we very quickly came to the realization that it was highly international in its scope, and that if it was a purely solo project, there would inevitably be stories in there that would not otherwise be told. When we were thinking about which partner, how we might go around sharing this data, we thought back to the great experiences we've had working with the ICIJ on Panama Papers, HSBC files. The ICIJ kind of wrote the book on how you do these operations, and they were a simply very obvious choice. They're highly professional. They're very experienced at sharing data securely, confidentially, in a manner that means it can be very easily read and accessed by multiple people and journalists who want to work together contemporaneously. So that there was once we'd made the decision to share, I think the ICIJ was a very, very obvious choice for us. And that started the process of reporters around the world looking at this data together, finding the stories that were relevant to their readers and to their viewers.
Thank you, David. I'll return to you later. Let me turn to Ritu. Ritu, a lot of your reports focused on the incident in Delhi in December 2014, when a young woman passenger was raped inside an Uber cab by an Uber driver, and what happened in its aftermath. So, could you tell us a little about how Uber started this damage control exercise in India and other parts of the world?
Yeah, must admit that it was because the documents were from 2013 to 17, so they covered that period of when the rape happened in December 2014. And it's really the aftermath of the rape incident and what happened legally in the US afterwards that made the story an immediate news story for us. When ICIJ offered the Uber story, I thought it would be a corporate scam. But it is the rape incident that made it a news story. And we also then tried to go beyond the story to find out what's happening to the victim and to the families subsequently. And I do remember when we got the data, just about the third document that I logged into was one in which Uber officials are talking about, how they should stop the pandemic of violence against women in India. So that is what the Uber executives thought, that they have, with this incident, contributed to something that is a pandemic of violence against India, And then there was another email I'd like to tell you about. It was around the same period, in fact, about 2-3 months before the rape incident, when a top Indian executive of Uber is debriefing his entire team on how to handle the India assignment. And he says that in India, you should embrace the chaos. That's one thing. And that became one of the headlines of the entire project. Even ICIJ ran it in one of its main stories. In India, you have to embrace the chaos. Then he also tells his India team that when the government approaches you or the regulators approach you, ignore them. Don't talk to them unless you have taken our prior permission. And forget controversies. You will see a lot of all this happening around India. Just focus on the market and keep growing bigger. So the ethos of what they wanted Uber to do in India was in that email. Then comes the rape, where Uber definitely does a lot of panic. They're in a state of panic. And then, if you recall, Uber was banned in the capital for a few months. And Uber in the emails is shown to be fearing that that ban may happen in other cities as well. So that whole damage control exercise after the rape is unveiled in the Uber files.
But Uber also resorted to shutting down local teams from its system. And they deployed what you reported was a kill switch.
Yeah.
So could you tell our
from some of my friends and readers, I did get oohs and ahs when they read about the kill switch. The fact is that the kill switch was written about before. It's not the first time that Uber has been connected with the kill switch, but the Uber files are the most authoritative sort of documentation of 13 instances when the kill switch was used. So, since this is a very intensive collaboration, we all detailed it. We all sort of, on the iHub that we use, we all logged in the 13 instances. India became one of them. And out of those 13 instances, there were clearly 6 instances when, as Dean said, the regulators or the raiders were at the door of Uber offices, and they were asked to headquarters shut down systems. Now, I must admit that in the case of India, the details in the documents are not so expansive as, say, they are in Paris or in Brussels. But there is a very telling email, again, a very senior Uber executive telling his staff that, what we've done, it's actually a boast. What we've done in New Delhi and what we've done in India is to make the local officers or local executives seem to be very cooperative, but actually we've shut down the systems.
Dean, Uber says that it is a changed company. It is no longer the company that was there when we're talking of this specific period from 2013 to 17. But has anything changed on the ground?
Look, I think that's sort of a problematic argument for Uber to make, because it wouldn't have achieved this global dominance were it not for the tactics that it used that were described in the Uber files. The fact is, the question isn't whether there should or shouldn't be ride sharing. That's not the ride hailing. All these things are basically misnomers for a taxi service. But basically, it's how they achieve this and the degree to which they were able to disrupt and distort local labor markets. So our documents, as Ritu was saying, they dealt with 2013 to 2017. So we don't know, is this a reform company, as they say? We'll just have to take their word for it for the time being. Having said that, the fact is that what they came in and what they achieved was essentially to disrupt, that is, to dismantle local labor protections for the labor market as it existed before. So now you're dealing with a market where the price for a taxi ride has been dramatically undercut. Now that's great for consumers, but it basically shifts costs and external negative externalities onto both Uber drivers and their competitors, and also leaves the local municipalities to try and clean up after Uber in this case. So I think we're still in a place where we're trying to figure out, basically, again, it's not whether or not there should or shouldn't be ride hailing. It's basically whether Uber drivers, like, and all other taxi drivers should be paid a living wage, for instance, should be enjoy normal benefits of other full-time employees, should enjoy labor protection, should be insured, and whether or not, frankly, that the true cost of a taxi ride is reflected in the Uber fare. And I think we're still trying to sort that. And Uber's earlier tactics have left these markets still in a place where they're still trying to recover.
David, the whistleblower, Mark McGann, he said he is in a legal dispute with Uber. Now, does that make him an interested party?
So, Mark, when he left Uber in 2017, he did so on fairly uncontroversial terms, but I think he later became involved in a dispute with the company over money that he said it owed him. That was kind of like, we were fully aware of that. He was very upfront with us about it. It was something that we were aware of from the beginning. This question of so what precisely has influenced somebody to come forward, and to what extent they have what in English would say, to what extent they have an axe to grind, to what extent they're angry at the person that they're providing information about. This is not unique to the Uber files. This is something that we deal with pretty much every story that we take on as investigative journalists. There is no such thing as a kind of as a source of information that has no life prior to when they spoke to you. That everyone has their reasons for how they're acting, and their life story that explains how they came to the position that they're in when they're in front of you offering to share information. Now, in Mark's case, there wasn't simply the legal dispute, but when he was working at the company, he became very, very kind of personally associated with Uber's behavior and the harm that Dean was referring to in terms of on other taxi drivers' livelihoods that taxi drivers believed Uber was causing. People were putting pictures of his face on the internet. They were making death threats. They were following him. They took pictures of his kids. He was in at least 2 incidents, I think several more, that were extremely frightening and involved people surrounding the car that he was in and shaking the car and banging on the window. He was assigned a team of bodyguards by Uber in order to protect him as he went about his business. They had to be with him whenever he left the house, which he was the head of lobbying for Uber, so that was all the time. And so he's for a prolonged, and this wasn't kind of a one-off thing. This was something that he lived with for a very sustained period of time, and that kind of took its toll on him. These were really, really stressful, frightening experiences that leave a mark on someone who's gone through something like that. So we were always aware that Mark's experience of what he'd been through at Uber was a part of his story. But in terms of how we balance that as journalists, and he was fully in agreement with this, is that we primarily told the story relying on the data. We weren't relying on his testimony. I mean, he's a very interesting person to speak to, and he's a very interesting man. But this is not something that's unique to him, this question of a source's motivations. Dean, you were going to jump in, I think.
Yeah, I was, because it's such a good answer. You basically, anticipated everything I was going to say, but just to your point, to expand on it first, it not necessarily, it's a fair question. I totally understand it, but it also is sort of not the right question, because really the whole thing is based on the documents provided. These are text messages and emails that basically speak for themselves. They're entirely authentic, and no one's ever disputed their authenticity. You can read them for themselves. You don't need Mark McGann to testify to anything. In fact, basically none of the projects based on his opinion. It was, that's number one. And number two, it just for viewers should kind of, I think, a little perspective, that the number of times that you actually learn who the source is of these documents, you can count on one hand. I mean, the only one that comes to mind right now is Edward Snowden. We recently, just the other day, there was the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the German newspaper that got a hold of the Panama Papers, the offshore revelations that kind of shook the world in 2016. They finally published a anonymous interview with the source of those. That's 6 years later. Still don't know who he is, because this guy fears for his life. Anyway, everyone is always intrigued at the source of the revelations and where they came from. In this case, I would say we know a lot more about the source and whether or not where he's coming from than any other project that you're going to come across, from the Pegasus hacking story to the Facebook. Well, we actually learned who the Facebook files source was eventually, but typically in this case, we know a lot more about the source of the documents than usual. And more to the point, the fact is that the data he presented, the documents he had, were extremely valuable and really rich in information all by themselves.
Rakesh, I just want to come in for a minute.
Sure.
While we're on the whistleblower, because this is behind the scenes. I'll just take you a little bit behind the scenes. And of course, only the Guardian team who knew who the source was. But this was a unique project in the sense that for at least 2 months after we began, the Guardian team offered to the rest of the partners, to all of us reporters on the project, that we can ask the source questions. There were many hanging questions despite us having scrutinized the documents. And there were at least 2 or 3 rounds, David would remember, of questions that everyone put in a group inside the iHub to the whistleblower without knowing who he is. And the other interesting thing is that when we were seeking comment from a lot of people, including the entire top brass, the former top brass of Uber, and Travis himself, and so many others, Mark was on the list. So many of them replied, some did not reply. And Mark McGann was one of the people who sent all of us off-the-record reply and on-record reply. So we picked up what we had.
So what you're saying is,
we did not know he was the whistleblower.
That he was the whistleblower. Why do you think he agreed to go public on his identity?
That's for me or David?
David can take that question.
I think Mark has given us an interview, and you can see it on the Guardian's website if you're interested in this. He's a very, very interesting man, and I think there's a great part of him that it's not just about making amends. I mean, Ritu made this point here, right, which is that we sent questions to him before publication, as well as him being the source of this information. That's because, I mean, he was involved in a lot of what we're reporting about. He was not a kind of third-party observer. I mean, a lot of what you've seen us write about is based on interactions that he was having, particularly in France. We're talking to Macron and things like that. These are all places where he was personally involved, and so I think for him there was an element of it that was about making amends, but it wasn't just that. I think he also has. I'm actually slightly speculating here. Only he can give you the correct answer. But I think from what I've seen of him, what I've heard him discuss, I think he has the sense of responsibility personally because he understands so much of how this company came to be the company that it is, so much of how companies like that can achieve what they want, as Dean said, by, if you like, hacking or circumventing the democratic process. And he has a unique insight into perhaps what we should be asking governments to change about the way they work, so that it's harder for this sort of thing to happen again in the future. And to the extent that he's able to play a role in an informed discussion about how lobbying works, if you're a big multinational company and you want to cruise into a new jurisdiction, a new market, and smash all the rules, and or get the rules changed to favor you, he's sort of seen it, and he understands it, and he knows what you would need to change in order to stop it happening again. And so I think part of the reason that he chose to identify himself is because he wants to contribute to that discussion. He thinks it's a conversation we need to have, and he wants to contribute to it.
Right. And I believe the Guardian put a large team on the Uber files.
We did.
So what legal safeguards did you have to take that the newspaper had?
Do you mean for us personally, as the organisation?
Yeah.
So I mean, the single most important legal safeguard that we will take on any single story is to behave fairly and responsibly. There are lots of problems with English law and how and more specifically the English court system and how it regulates journalism. But the law itself does protect fair and responsible journalism. If you behave professionally, thoughtfully, responsibly, and carefully, British law does provide you with protections. And so the single most important thing for us, both legally, but also editorially, I think is why readers trust us when they're reporting on stories like this, is that we are exceptionally careful about how we handle the data. The data was kept in securely. When it was given to the ICIJ, the ICIJ are world experts at keeping data like this secure, whilst also making it available for reporters to analyze. So we were very careful in the partner that we chose. And anyone that we wrote about, we have an important process called invitation to comment, where if we're going to say something new or serious about them, we write to them in advance and say, we're reporters from The Guardian. We've learned this piece of information about you from X, Y, and Z back in 2015 or whenever it was. We're considering publishing an article. Do you have any information that you'd like to tell us about that, or would you like to comment? And that gives people an opportunity to say, that's not quite right, you've got a bit wrong, or to say, well, yes, that is right, but you should also know some other piece of information that's an important piece of context. And oftentimes it gives people an opportunity to say, yes, I did do that and I regret it as well. I wouldn't do it again. I learned my lesson, which is important, and people have a right to say that. And so if you behave in that way, British law does provide you with protections from being sued or whatever. It's not bulletproof, but it's the single best thing you can do to protect yourself, both legally and in terms of maintaining the trust of your audience and your readers as well. So that was the process that governed our behavior from start to finish.
Ritu, during the course of your investigation, you looked at how Uber bypassed local laws and regulations. So tell us a little about what sort of regulatory problems did it face in India?
Yeah, I think it's been a regulatory mess for them from the time they came in. And they've been like a sledgehammer with so many Indian regulations. I can recap a bit. To begin with, it was the FERA rules, the and the RBI, because the Uber, when they came into India, were paying the drivers via a company called BB Uber or something, via the Netherlands. And then there were complaints to the Reserve Bank of India. And Uber was forced to change rules and get some licenses in, and it was one of the first important markets where they were forced to do it. So that issue was a bit resolved. And then there were service tax issues, again, which they were evading. Evidently and obviously, they evaded service tax in India for a long time. And then there are documents, and in fact, there are PPT presentations in the data where they are boasting about the manner in which they resolve the service tax issues in the country. So the way they handled it and the way they tried to stretch it till as long as they could became sort of example for Uber itself. But coming to the current, these documents entered 2017. We, of course, wanted to do an update. And we now find that Uber is, as we speak, or when we did the series 2 weeks ago, into a lot of issues with the tax department, which are still pending. They have issues before the consumer courts, and there are 770 complaints against Uber, which have all been bunched up and are being heard by the Central Consumer Protection Authority. And what's very interesting also is the point Dean made earlier. There is a PIL, an important PIL, which has been admitted in the Supreme Court, which is not only for Uber, it's for other aggregators like Ola and all that also, where the petitioners, which include the taxi union drivers of India, the largest union, they have also pleaded in the case, that drivers should be seen as workers and therefore should get all the social security benefits that other workers in other industries get, and they should not just be seen as aggregators. So that PIL is pending in the Supreme Court. It has just been listed. And I think the outcome of that will be very important for companies like Uber.
Dean, do you see amendments being made to laws in other countries, in other parts of the world?
Well, yes and no. Here's the the immediate impact in Europe, for instance, was pretty significant, where you saw investigations open in the European Commission and in the Netherlands into the behavior of former European Commissioner Nelly Kroes and in intervening in the behalf of Uber with Dutch authorities during a criminal investigation there. And there were reverberations in France where Emmanuel Macron was called to account for giving Uber a leg up, particularly in regulatory matters that we documented in France. I would say more broadly about this, Rakesh, is that this is sort of I hope, sort of the opening of a discussion about lobbying and influence, or at least continuation and education of the public about how it really works. Because I feel like if you read our stories, this isn't just some sort of abstract view. This is sort of the guts of law, the intimate back and forth, real time interactions between powerful individuals and Uber lobbyists, and who themselves used to be powerful political leaders. In the U.S., it was not an accident that they hired David Plouffe and Jim Messina, who not well known maybe elsewhere, but in the US, they're sort of Democratic rock stars from the Obama administration who were able to open doors all around the world and gain influence for Uber that, frankly, that the taxi industry never could match. And the idea, though, really is about, look, do we have a level playing field? Is everybody playing by the same set of rules? Does everyone have a seat at the table? And the answer, I think, that the Uber file shows is no, and not at all. And and again, it's not just some 30,000 foot view. This is sort of real time text between you. might take an example, text between. I'm trying to remember. It was McGann and Jim Messina about the U.S. ambassador to Paris, and they were just joking about her. And hey, we did get her France. We gave her the job, while he was in the Obama administration. Ha ha ha! And it was all about, again, it's just this kind of like, you really get to see how, there's the theory, and then there's how it really works. And I think we're seeing how it really works with this kind of material that Mark McGann has made available to us, that we would never otherwise see. And if it's the beginning of a conversation about how lobbying works and how the process works, and is it fair, and does everybody is everybody's voice heard in these disputes, and in these contests before markets, are all parties getting are their interests being taken into account? If that discussion if we're able to spark that kind of discussion, I think we have, then I think that's our, that's we've accomplished a big part of the mission.
Right, and you think this lobbying, this aggressive lobbying, it still continues?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the kind of this late stage capitalism phenomenon where money is always talked, right? But now money really just, it's the only voice in the room. And I feel like, that's sort of the thing that we sort of need to address. It shouldn't be who has the deepest pockets and who's able to hire the most famous ex-Obama administration official who wins the policy argument of the day. I mean, again, it's all about whether interests are fairly balanced by public officials who keep an arm's length from all parties and make decisions based on the broader public interest. And I would add, not just consumers' interests. Consumers are important, but they're not the whole show. I mean, you can't lay off your costs onto society. You can't lay off your costs onto your drivers. You have to actually pick up the costs for the responsibility for the operations that you're managing, and for the profits that you're accruing from them. So all this is again part of this wider discussion that I hope we can get started with this project.
David, in the UK, the investigation that the Guardian did there, I mean, to what extent did it reveal, Uber's attempts to evade or avoid public scrutiny? Were they trying to thwart attempts at scrutiny?
So as Ritu, and I can't, it was either Ritu or Dean, as I think it was Ritu said, things like the kill switch have been reported before. There's a similar technology called Greyball, which was used to try and sort of thwart regulators by essentially showing regulators a fake version of Uber that they would never be able to hire a cab from, in order to stop them from being able to test whether they were, operating a licensed taxi business. We knew that those technologies existed, but it's entirely right that this is effectively the most authoritative version of how widely they were used. The discussions that were occurring internally about how they were used, and the locations that they were used. We didn't know that they were used in all of these locations. The use was much more widespread than has previously been reported, which heavily suggests that it was a global decision to behave in this way. It wasn't some rogue team in one particular country. And one of the most interesting aspects of the story for me is actually the messages you can see internally within Uber at the time when they are being raided and when they are considering deploying the kill switch, which often involve people frantically texting each other saying, police are in the building, kill access now. And they're sort of sending messages to the headquarters in Amsterdam, I think it is, so that a technical team there can cut off the server, and so that the police can't investigate what's on the computers in the local office in Paris or Brussels or wherever it is. And at one point, somebody says, "Oh, use this." I think it's with a reference to the lawyer. Use the playbook of, looking a bit confused and no, I can't really understand. Why is the computer not working? And the person replies, "Oh, we've done that so many times. The only difficulty is being convincing when we trot it out now." Yeah. So, I mean, it does really give texture to this sense that this was something that was happening, so regularly within Uber that it was a kind of defining part almost of the week that, somebody somewhere would get raided by some regulator. and the company would frantically shut things down and say, "Oh well, the computer's not working, but really this is all San Francisco's problem. They're all asleep. So why don't you come back in 8 hours when they've woken up, and we'll see. We'll take it from there." So I think in terms of we knew that sort of frustrating, shall we say, regulators and police was a part of what Uber had done. But I think, I mean, this does tell us something significant about the scale at which those strategies were deployed. I mean, we didn't know that.
So before we turn to questions from the audience, Ritu, I wanted to ask you, India is such a large market for Uber. And so do the Uber files, do they impact companies' style of functioning in the country?
See, what Uber India replied to us is almost identical to the reply they gave to the ICIJ, from San Francisco. And their main message is that, yes, they haven't used the word apology, but they say, yes, we may have made some mistakes, but we are a different kind of company now. That is largely what Uber is saying. And also about the kill switch, that there are other uses for this technology. It was also interesting the way we found linking up the threads, of all the coverage that we did. That when the rape happened, then Uber boasted to the world that beginning with India, we are introducing other elements to our safety, and that is the SOS switch.
Panic button, you mean?
Right, the panic button. So we thought we should do some spot reporting and look at how the panic buttons are working. And it was quite shocking that 6 years later, when Uber boasted about introducing the panic button after the rape, the technology has not been integrated. When a reporter went to the ground, it seemed like something which was round the corner, but the point is, it has not yet happened. The technology of the aggregator cab service, that is Uber in this case, and the Delhi Transport Department and the Delhi Police is not integrated. 6 years. So that was quite an eye opener. And as you know, Uber now operates in 100 Indian cities. But transport being a state subject, the issue of surge prices for cab aggregators and all that is really taken by the state government. And I think there's just one state in India, probably Karnataka, which has really made the rules and regulations, none other.
Well, we can start with some questions from the audience. This is Professor Sumit Mitra from the Indian Institute of Management in Kozhikode. He has a question. Yes, Professor Mitra.
We can come back to him, sir.
All right. Well, then we could. This was Anuaga from Thermax. She has a question.
My question was, Mark was directly leading the sort of operations for influencing politicians and who's who. System to be cleaned up, to me, I can't accept it. What do you think was the real motive for him to be a whistleblower after being very integral part of this dirty system?
So, David, would you like to answer?
For me, I think so. The question is, how do we explain Mark's coming forward? I mean, you can see if it can be difficult to understand oftentimes how somebody can be a part of something and then change position on it and reveal it to the world. But that's true of a great many kind of whistleblowers and a great many sources. The very notion of blowing the whistle is very often an act of saying, I've gone along with this. I've made mistakes that I shouldn't have done it. And now I'm going to take on a great deal of personal risk and a great deal of personal cost in order to tell the public something that they need to know. this is not some kind of easy thing that Mark has done. Being a whistleblower is not a walk in the park. He's going to have to live a very different life now. He was an extremely high-powered public relations executive, very successful career, working for a high-profile company in an exciting new field. Those things have changed. He's not doing this in a sense that it's some huge benefit to him. In some sense, this comes with a very great personal cost. He's going to have people, friends are going to be angry with him for having done this, I would imagine, because they view a confidence as having been breached. I can't imagine that he was going to want to hire him back. So the idea that that it doesn't completely absolve him, you might say, of some of the things that he was a part of, that the system he was a part of, as you put it. I think he would probably agree with that. But that, as he says, is precisely why he's wanted to do this. It's part of making amends, and it's part of fixing it so that it can't happen again.
Zarwin Chaturvedi is the director, School of Management at the IIL University. He has a question.
So we can come back to him. I think he's trying.
All right. Is Mr. Prakash Pandya here? He's an advocate, a mediator, and an insolvency professional.
Yes, I am here.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for a wonderful session and eye-opening to learn about Uber files. My question is multifold. Number one, that have they violated the Indian laws? I believe certainly there is unfair trade practices adopted. That could be corruption charges. That could be framed. And what about the privacy issue? Because we all know that India has a data privacy law, which has been protested by VPNs. Some of the VPNs are going away. So these are my three multi-point pointers. And is government taking any actions? That's the 14.
Yeah. So one, your point on the violations. So what I'll want to mention here is that I spoke about service tax. Now, service tax has now become GST. And when we did the story, there is a complaint against Uber of an outstanding of 827 crores for not having paid GST. And now your point about the privacy issue. This is one of the several projects that Indian Express has collaborated with the ICIJ. And the ground rules are very clear that the data remains only with the journalists and with the reporters who are on the project. They are not to be shared with anyone in the government or outside the core group of the project. So the data remains only with us. And in the case of the Uber files, there was a further proviso that we could quote from the documents, but we could not publish the documents. So the data remains the repository of the ICIJ, and we are certainly not allowed to give a single document to anyone. And very often when we've done our offshore projects like Panama Papers and Pandora Papers, we have official requests from the government or the finance ministry also asking for the data, and we just reply saying, contact the ICIJ, and we are not allowed to give the data to anyone.
Dean, would you want to add to that?
Just add that we're very experienced at saying no. That was one of the first questions that came up after the very first, David referenced the offshore leaks back in 2013. We had people in trench coats and fedoras showing up at our Washington offices. I think they were from the IRS or somewhere, and we've been turning down authorities for a long time now. So we're not an arm of any government. We're not an arm of any law enforcement agency. We're all independent news organizations, trying to publish investigations in the public interest, and we try to, and that's how it. And we try to keep it that way.
This is just to jump in and add there. I think this is a question. I mean, it's nice to hear Ritu say that ask the ICIJ is the answer she gives each of these times, because that's what we've been saying too. So it's good to know that we're all reading from the same script when the British government come knocking at our door as well. This principle that Dean and Ritu speak to, that we are not an arm of the government, we do not represent the state, we are an independent watchdog working on behalf of the public, is very, very, very important to us. It gives us a great deal of sort of credibility and trust with our readers, and sometimes that can be very frustrating for people, because they want say tax evaders, for instance, to come to justice, and they say, well, why can't you give it all over to the government so that they can go after everyone? And what we invariably have to say every single time is that is not our job, and it would damage us, and it would damage journalism more broadly if we did behave in that way. We can put you in touch with, our whistleblower or something, and if they want to share it with you, then you can have that conversation with them directly if they want to talk to you. But it can't be through us. We are independent, and we have to preserve that independence. Journalists must be independent of the state.
And I've had some very senior people from enforcement on a couple of occasions when I've refused sharing information with them, say that, okay, next time I'm in Washington, I'm going to complain to the ICIJ. So I think, go ahead. Feel free to do that.
Right. Okay. Bimla Kumari from Yojna IAS wants to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm Bimla from Yojna. I have a question. Uber has been known for the dispute earlier also. Why we do not make the same laws for operation of these taxi service in India?
Okay, what she's asking is that Uber is known to have flouted laws earlier. So why isn't there a specific law in place? Is that the question? Am I getting you right?
Yes,
Ritu?
Yeah. Well, one Dean, of course, can add to this, but one would be that different countries have different laws and rules and regulations. Even in our country, different states have different rules and regulations. So there really cannot be one omnibus law that guides aggregator companies like Uber. That would be the basic premise. Dean?
Well, I would also say there already are laws. All you have to do is enforce them. I mean, you're not supposed to operate a taxi service without a license. That's what we have prosecutors for. That's why we have regulators. That's why so there are laws on the books. The question is, are they going to be enforced? You could argue, that there are laws against obstructing a law enforcement investigation. There are actually laws that are relevant to this. The question is, who where are the regulators? Where are the prosecutors? Are they gonna step in and enforce the authority they already have?
Okay. I think it's time we call it a day now. We're running out of time. I just wanted to thank the audience and to you, Dean, David, and Ritu. And thank you, Yojna IAS, the associate partner. We hope to be back with another session soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yojana is offering new batches for 2023, 2024, 2025. We are offering online and offline class English and Hindi medium. Our features are experienced faculties, mentorship program, doubt session and test series, online and offline mock test, current affair classes, study material and mock interview. For more information, contact us on 8595390705. For more details, visit on www.yojanais.com. Yojana is offering new batches for 2023, 2024, 2025. We are offering online and offline class English and Hindi medium. Our features are experienced faculties, mentorship program, doubt session and test series, online and offline mock test, current affair classes, study material